Imagine being asleep in your home when out of nowhere, FBI agents break down your front door, throw in flashbang grenades, drag you out, put you in handcuffs, and hold your wife at gunpoint. And this all happens because they actually raid the wrong home. Now here's the kicker: when you try to hold the government accountable for their mistakes, the government argues they can't be sued because their agents have discretion to plan these raids and actually get things wrong. This exact situation went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued a 9-0 unanimous decision in favor of the family. But now this case is back in the hands of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals after that Supreme Court decision and remand, and the government still argues that that Supreme Court ruling should not impact the outcome of this case at all. Now, the case we're talking about in this video is called Martin versus the United States. It comes out of a suburban Atlanta area where back in 2017, the FBI executed a pre-dawn raid against this home. The only problem is that they actually got the wrong address. Now, the family inside decided to sue the federal government under the Federal Tort Claims Act, also known as the FTCA. Now, the question that the courts had to address was, does the federal government get to walk away from liability, or can someone actually sue them and try to hold them accountable for these types of mistakes? Now, this case was recently remanded back to the 11th Circuit for a new ruling in light of what the Supreme Court just said in that 9-0 ruling. And we're going to talk about that ruling here in just a second. But ultimately, after that Supreme Court ruling, this case was remanded back down to the 11th Circuit for a new decision, and the government has now responded to this based on what the Supreme Court said. And in their brief, the federal government argues that the Supreme Court in that ruling should not impact the outcome of this case at all. Now, here's what happened in this case. The FBI here executed a raid, and it was led by FBI Special Agent Lawrence Guerrera, who was tasked with leading a pre-dawn raid against that home where there was some suspected gang members where they were believed to be hiding in that home. Now, the agents had scouted the street where the individuals were believed to be. However, the agent actually put the address in his personal GPS, and that GPS led him to the wrong house, which was 3 doors down from the actual target, where they were planning to go. The GPS routed him to a completely different home where Katrina Martin lived with her boyfriend and their 7-year-old son at the time. The agents claimed that the house did not have numbers displayed, showing the address, and they did not double check the mailbox before they decided to go into the home because they also claimed that the time was critical, that they didn't have time to double check that, so they decided to go into the home. When the FBI agents arrived at that house, like I mentioned, they knocked on the door, then quickly smashed in the front door, threw in flashbang grenades. Eventually, they found Katrina Martin and her boyfriend in a closet. At that time, her boyfriend also had a shotgun when they were in the closet. The boyfriend was pulled out, handcuffed, and Katrina Martin also was pulled out, held at gunpoint, and at that time she was half dressed as well because, again, this happened early in the morning. Now, after the agents had detained the family, they did a search of the home, and while performing that search of the home, one of the agents noticed that there was some mail, and that mail had a different address than the address they were supposed to be at. That's kind of when they had this huge oh crap moment, and they realized that they had raided the wrong home. They then decided to leave quickly. They went 3 doors down, raided the correct home, and told the family that they would be back to explain what happened. Now, in response to this entire situation, the family decided to sue the federal agency, the FBI, based on the mistakes that happened in that raid. They brought a claim under the Federal Tort Claims Act, also known as the FTCA, which is a law that allows people to sue the federal government for certain wrongful acts by federal employees when those employees are acting in the scope of their job. Now, normally the government and individual agents are shielded, but essentially the FTCA is one of those situations where the federal government has agreed to let people bring these types of torts claims against them. But the FTCA comes with a long list of exceptions where they cannot be sued. And one of those was at issue in this case and is called the discretionary function exception. That exception shields the federal government when the wrongful act stems from an official making a discretionary decision. Here, the FBI claimed that that discretionary decision was how the agents planned that raid, how they scouted for the raid, and also how they executed it. Now, when the family filed their lawsuit in the federal district court, the government moved to dismiss the case and argued that both the intentional tort and discretionary function exceptions barred this type of claim. This case was then appealed to the 11th Circuit, and once again, the 11th Circuit ruled in favor of the FBI. This case then went to the United States Supreme Court. A cert petition was sought. It was granted by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued a 9-0 unanimous ruling in favor of the family. The Supreme Court, in that unanimous ruling written by Justice Gorsuch, vacated the 11th Circuit's decision and sent the case back down for re-review in a new decision. That Supreme Court remand sent the case back down to the 11th Circuit for new briefs and a new decision on whether or not that discretionary function exception bars the Martins' negligent and intentional tort claims from what they brought against the FBI based on that FBI wrong house raid. Now, before we jump into what the federal government argued on remand now in front of the 11th Circuit in light of what the Supreme Court just said in that 9-0 decision, I just want to mention that if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe to the channel. That, of course, helps the channel to grow. And then also just double check to make sure YouTube has not unsubscribed you, because they love to do that, especially on 2A channels. So with all that said, let's jump back into what was just argued by the federal government in this case. Now, the federal government has issued their new brief. They have filed their supplemental brief to the 11th Circuit in light of what the Supreme Court said. And in the brief, the government argues that the 11th Circuit should still rule the same way despite what the Supreme Court just said, because the family's claims are still barred under other laws and also still under the FTCA. The government's central position is that the agent's mistaken entry into the wrong home resulted directly from a discretionary decision. And they said that that discretion is involving how to conduct the pre-raid surveillance, how to approach the house in the dark, how to navigate without alerting suspects, and how to identify the structure from its external features and based on, identifying features that they find in accordance with their plan. They state that no statute, regulation, or constitutional rule or binding policy dictated the specific steps that the agents had to take, and based on that, they had discretion to plan for that raid. In the brief, the government argues that while it is true that they weren't named a specific address as the place of execution, the officer had to make numerous decisions regarding how to execute the warrant. This, they claim, is the epitome of discretion. And based on that, they argue that the actions still fall within the FTCA's discretionary function exception there, and that the federal government cannot be held responsible for those mistakes. Now, you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with gun owners? Well, the reason why this is so important is because wrong house raids, mistaken identity arrests, and excessive force situations happen a lot and impact a lot of law-abiding gun owners. When raids go bad, they can lead to deadly consequences, and we've had a lot of high-profile situations where gun owners are potentially raided by federal agencies and things go really bad. And if the government can hide behind this broad discretion that they claim, and they can claim this every time that they mess up, well, really, then there is no accountability. The Supreme Court's ruling here in Martin potentially narrows the government's ability to avoid these types of lawsuits by claiming broad discretion and broad immunity. And these cases reinforce that the federal government may be held accountable when they recklessly invade someone's home or potentially misuse their power or just simply make huge mistakes. However, in this new brief, the federal government continues to argue that the actions here fall within their discretionary authority and that the case should be dismissed based on the agents also having qualified immunity. So that's what's currently happening in this critical case as a result of the new 9-0 unanimous ruling that was just issued by the Supreme Court in this challenge. The federal government is still claiming that they have broad immunity based on discretion and the discretion of the agents to potentially plan this and still make mistakes. And right now, we're going to have to wait and see how does the plaintiff respond to this in the 11th Circuit. So as we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. Also, if you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that, like I mentioned, is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm. Also, you can check out one of the 2 videos here on the screen that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll find helpful. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.